Thanks, Sasha. General Assembly, which I'll call GA, this year in Spokane was my 6th GA I've attended. It's pretty amazing. This is out of about the last 10 years. I'd like to give you the flavor of that particular experience, including things that are common to General Assemblies each year and those that are unique from this year. Some of the common elements include, as Sasha said, a large group of UU clergy, religious educators, and lay delegates from across the U.S. and other countries gathered in one place. Lots of youth attending, with all of their energy and enthusiasm. It really keeps us going, keeps us alive. A lot of inspiring music and musicians, some new and some familiar, but you get this big group of UUs and everybody knows the words and sings out, so it's a great experience in addition to the choir that is there, specially selected for General Assembly. We hear reports and recognition from various UUA committees, and there are quite a few standing committees that go on doing the work of our faith throughout the year. We hear inspiring speakers at the worship services from some of our very best pastors, as well as lectures such as the Ware Lecture, a sponsored lecture that addresses specific issues of interest. There are a lot of workshops led by UUA staff and other experienced lay and religious professionals. These have included sessions on leadership, governance, ministry, social action, anti-racism, and worship. We meet new people and reconnect with those that we've met before from other congregations. We conduct the business of the UUA and see how our skillful moderators keep the process moving while listening politely to a variety of opinions. And those of us who are delegates have voting cards, sort of like the ones here that we hold up, and you have a hall of thousands of people, and most resolutions are unanimous or near unanimous, but there are some that actually require hand counts of over 1,000 delegates. And then lastly, seeing a new city and region that Jerry and I have built several summer vacations around GA and have always enjoyed traveling and going to different places. Some of the items that were different or special to this GA, at least within our experience, included a smaller attendance than some of the previous GAs, probably because of a smaller city, Spokane, and the distance for many UUs. However, there are still about 2,000 attendees, so it's a pretty massive group. The schedule was somewhat compressed this year, that there was more emphasis on workshops and less time allowed for business meetings. And so by not having the Sunday afternoon business meetings, it left a lot of people time to either explore the city or to leave for home earlier and make it more affordable. It seems like in the last few years there's been more and more emphasis on the off-site delegates, people that are tied to the session by their computer, are able to vote on the business items, and also to hear the various lectures and sermons. And that was something that Jerry and I did, I guess it was last year. We were remote delegates. We would plug the computer into our television. We'd watch interestedly. When time came for a vote, since we were both delegates, one of us would run upstairs, one of us would stay downstairs and make sure we got our 2 little votes counted. One of the differences this year was the Ware lecturer. Usually it's someone who's oriented towards social action. In the past, Martin Luther King gave a Ware lecture, Cornel West, Ibu Patel, Karen Armstrong, people that are sort of experts in their fields, and particularly religion and social justice. The lecturer this year was Richard Blanco, who was an award-winning poet. He gave the reading at President Obama's inauguration. So this was much more artistic, poetic, more feeling than it was intellectual, and we enjoyed that. He did a really good job. There was a somewhat different format in the Service of the Living Tradition. This is a service held annually honoring newly fellowshipped clergy and religious education professionals. And we saw our Reverend Sasha walk up to the stage and get her final fellowship, which now is the full fellowship. Yeah, the UU Ministers Association decided that since we are always learning and growing, nothing is final, and so therefore it's called full fellowships, and Sasha will continue her education as the years go by. And we noticed at the Service of Living Tradition, it's traditional for all the clergy to process down the aisle to the stage to the words and music of rank by rank again we stand. I think I looked it up this morning, it's number 358, and it's just very traditional, and we noticed they didn't sing it, and I mentioned that to Sasha, and the reason is that it's considered, for those who are unable to stand, they feel hurt by those words, and so there were other songs, and I thought that was being very sensitive to a group of people for their desires that was just sort of the way Standing on the Side of Love is now answering the call of love. And then this year especially, it's been going on for several years, there's an increased emphasis on anti-racism and anti-oppression training. Many of the workshops, plenary sessions, and worships were led by UUs of color. There were a lot of, in addition, there were many readings and songs in Spanish to honor the Hispanic people that were there. I would encourage all of you to attend at least one General Assembly if possible. I mean, it's not like taking the Hajj to Mecca that it's required. It's not required, but I think it's a really good thing. To me, it really deepened my faith. It will help build and renew your commitment to this faith. You'll learn more about Unitarian Universalism and meet some really good people who share our faith. So we can start planning now for next year's General Assembly, which will be in Providence, Rhode Island.
I'm height challenged. I'm Judy Edmonston, and I have been fortunate to serve as a delegate from UUFR at 17 on-site General Assemblies, I think, plus 2 off-site remote GAs, as Larry was talking about. And I've been asked many times by people here at UUFR and by others, why do I take my time and money to go to a new location with 2,000 to 3,000 or 4,000 people, other UUs, each June? And a simple answer to why I go is that I love to travel. And GA does require travel. But travel usually involves going to new, exciting places and seeing sights. GA is not that. It's hours of sitting, and I don't mean this to sound negative, because to me it's interesting. I love it. It's hours of sitting in workshops, attending worship services, and knitting through hours of business sessions. Unless I go early or stay late, I never see anything of any of the places I go other than the airport, the hotel, and the convention center. I also love experiencing new things, and that's where GA really shines. Daily worship services plus special services like the Service of the Living Tradition introduce members and delegates to some of the finest ministers, musicians, and others in our denomination. The workshops feature some, as Larry said, feature some of the best and brightest UUs and others to address issues ranging from social justice to church management to climate change. But I believe the real reason I attend GA is to learn more about this exciting experience called Unitarian Universalism. I want to see how it works, why it works. I want to learn about the denomination-wide concerns about racism. I want to understand UU growth or its setbacks. Important work gets done at GA. This year we made a number of bylaws changes to the UUA governing documents. By we, I mean we. Marge Link, Larry Meisner and his wife Jerry, and me, and almost 2,000 other delegates. It's vital work that we have the opportunity to be a part of. UUFR and more than 1,000 other churches are led by the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston, while the UUA board, which is elected by GA delegates, acts on measures as required at board meetings during the year. Any substantive bylaws or direction changes are determined by delegate voting at GA. I started going to GA when I was fully employed and had to take part of my annual vacation to attend. I pay my own way, although delegates who itemize deductions get to take a charitable tax write-off, or at least they used to. I'm not sure what things are like right now. I spend time in 2 small airplane seats and eat overpriced hotel meals because it's worth it to me to take part in this vital experience. It makes me feel a part of something bigger than me, just as Unitarian Universalism itself does. One little aside about how UUs influence change in our world. At our hotel in Spokane this year, the management removed all free bottles of water from guest rooms in keeping with UU values. It started a food operation where leftover food was distributed to shelters at the end of the day, and it added compostable waste containers to its kitchen and waste services. These changes are supposed to be ongoing, permanent practices at the hotel, and UUs helped create the environment for these changes. I'm very proud. Next year's GA will be June 24th through 28th in Providence, Rhode Island. It's not a long way to travel. It's in the area of many, many historic places, so I suggest, like Larry said, that you take a vacation and spend 4 days at GA and then go and see the things in Boston and the things, the Roger Williams foundations and foundings in Rhode Island, Newport. There's lots to do. I hope I'll be there, and I hope some of you will be there with me.
This year in Spokane was my 46th General Assembly. That sounds a little bit obsessive and maybe weird, but the explanation, I got started on this in 1975, and from 1975 until 2001, I was serving on one UUA committee or another, and each year we held a meeting at GA, so I had to be there. But I also was a delegate from this congregation at the same time. In the course of those years, I made many good friends and worked with some remarkable people. So now every year I feel called to go back as one would to a family reunion. In the years that I have prepared a report to the congregation, the main topic for me has been the ongoing attempt on the part of the UUA to tackle institutional racism with the goal of becoming a truly anti-racist organization. It's been a bumpy ride, with some successes and some significant failures. Now there may be new hope with a new administrative leadership and collaboration with Black Lives of UU, which is an organization formed in 2015 to expand the role of Black UUs within the faith. They are young and enthusiastic about creating a new kind of community. The business program of GA this year was vastly different from the past. The effort was to develop a culture that is not rooted in the white European system that has served us throughout the history of the two denominations. It wasn't easy to negotiate a discussion without constant reliance on Robert's Rules of Order. And sometimes we fell back into old patterns that made it impossible for some voices to be heard. But somehow the work got done. As one who has always liked the logic and order of Roberts, I realized that this is a time for me to step back, examine my own biases, and watch a change that is a work in progress. It's going to be necessary to let go of some of our own preferences that stand in the way of that progress. I think Sasha will have more to say about this. On the heels of what was a highly successful GA, I have 3 suggestions for ways that the fellowship can become more involved in UUA activities in the future. 1, provide funding in the annual budget for at least one board member to attend GA every year. 2, reactivate a denominational affairs committee to monitor and publicize the many activities and resources that the UUA provides. And 3, host a virtual GA here. Next year's GA will be in Providence, Rhode Island. Recognizing that not everyone has the time or money to travel to GA, there is an opportunity to participate without having to travel. Most of the activities of GA are live streamed with the possibility for virtual participation. We now have the technological ability to make this sanctuary into a virtual GA. Let's try to plan for that. Our new minister, who will be here in a little over a month, has spent the recent part of his career working in the UUA regional structure, so he will be a big help for getting these initiatives off the ground.
Thank you all for sharing and also for serving as delegates to our General Assembly. This is important work that we do together. And I always find it so interesting to hear everyone's different experiences of General Assembly. I think you maybe heard 3 very different perspectives. The event is so large that there can be as many experiences as there are delegates. One person might go and focus primarily on attending all the social events like concerts and receptions, dances and parties and celebrations. Another person may go as a spiritual practice and attend as many worship services, spiritual practice offerings as they can find. And another still might attend public witness events and as many justice opportunities, programs, and workshops as are offered. And yet another person might go and focus entirely on educational opportunities like workshops and lectures. Like the prince's experiences of the red bud tree in our story earlier, no single experience of General Assembly can fully capture the whole of it. But when we talk to one another, when we hear these different perspectives, we can get a much fuller picture at times of the magnificent, vibrant reality of Unitarian Universalism and how we choose to govern ourselves. And I hope that hearing from our delegates today has given you a broad sense of what this year's General Assembly was like, and I hope that you will consider attending in person or online in the future. It's a transformative experience. It is a powerful opportunity to really learn a lot about our faith and about yourself alongside other Unitarian Universalists. And I too went to General Assembly this year and had my own unique experience. While I did attend worship services and workshops, as well as spend time out in the city and with friends and colleagues, and of course, members of our congregation who were there, 2 things really stood out for me this year. The first was the meeting of the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association in Spokane a couple of days before General Assembly started, when we made the decision together to enter into a year of study to consider some incredibly important and overdue changes to our professional standards. And second, what stands out for me is the decision that Larry mentioned earlier, the decision by both the Ministers Association as well as the General Assembly itself to update some language pertaining to the status of ministers in our professional organization. Many of you were here with us on Sunday just a few months ago when we announced here in the worship service that I had been granted something called Final Fellowship by the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, which is a national body that oversees the credentialing of our ministers. Final Fellowship is granted to new Unitarian Universalist ministers following a 3-year period of formal mentorship, evaluation, and professional development. And back in March, we celebrated this milestone in our ministry together during the worship service, and you presented me with a beautiful rainbow-colored stole and framed artwork that now hangs on my wall at home. And while I was really excited to be granted Final Fellowship, I am also incredibly thrilled by the decision at General Assembly this year to change the name of Final Fellowship to Full Fellowship. Because as Larry pointed out, there's nothing final about learning to become a minister. And I know this might seem like an incredibly small change, but it represents something that is incredibly important. The name change symbolizes a necessary shift in our thinking within our association, a much needed and long overdue shift. Instead of thinking of our ministers as belonging to a learned ministry, we are instead moving to thinking about us as being part of a learning ministry, Again, the shift is from a learned ministry to a learning ministry. And to fully get why this change is important, it is helpful to know a bit about our Unitarian Universalist history. There used to be a time, especially in the early years of American Unitarianism and Universalism, when our ministers were among the most educated, and sometimes were the most educated, in the congregations they served. They were understood to be public teachers of morality, and back then it made sense to think of ministers as, again, being a learned ministry, a ministry of highly educated people, experts in their fields, whose job it was to come into congregations and use their formidable intellects, education, and training to teach people. But that time has long since passed. Today, our ministers do remain some of the most educated people in the United States, but we're not alone anymore. Our lay people are also among the most educated religious people in the country, and our ministers serve churches today in which a substantial number of our parishioners are just as educated, if not more so, than we are. Out in our congregations are powerhouses of knowledge and skill, not just from advanced degrees either, but from a wealth of life experiences in a wide variety of different fields, all of which are important in congregational life. And yet it is often the case that our philosophy of religious leadership and the institutional structures that support it lag behind the times. Today, our leadership structures often persist in treating ministers like we are silos of knowledge and decision-making authority. When we're not careful, we can sometimes find ourselves isolating our ministers from the depth and breadth of knowledge around us and the many opportunities to learn from and make decisions in consultation with others. And there is at times an assumption that ministers in final fellowship pretty much already know everything that it could possibly be to know about how to be good ministers. But, spoiler alert, we don't. For example, right now there is an increasing discussion within our association about the need for more trauma-informed ministers, and ministers with a more solid foundation in anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural theory and practice. All of us have a great deal still to learn about a great many things, and what we need to learn will, of course, change as our society changes. And all of that learning can be messy. And yet, unlike a lot of other professional organizations, we haven't had a very good track record of requiring our ministers to engage in professional development on an ongoing basis. If it happens at all, it usually happens because of the will of the minister, because of the encouragement of the congregation, and maybe a little bit of peer pressure. But the change in the name of final fellowship to full fellowship represents our intention, at least, to place an increased priority on continuing education, continuing learning in an ongoing and lifelong basis. And to that end, we are working toward having ministers go through a minimum of 60 hours of professional development every 3 years in our ministries. We are also looking into shared leadership structures, which is a growing edge for us as an association. Structures that invite others into decision-making processes, especially voices that are often excluded, and which help leaders tap more effectively into the knowledge, wisdom, and skills of the people around us, again, especially including people whose knowledge, skills, and leadership is often pushed to the sides. And we are looking into ways, and this is really important when we make the commitment to engage in learning, we are looking into ways to do a better job of holding ourselves accountable for the times when our learning has been insufficient, and when, because it has been insufficient, the mistakes we have made have created great harm. Part of this learning involves learning to admit our failings with humility, learning how to stay in relationship as we repair what has been broken as opposed to trying to disengage from relationship, and learning to commit to engaging in new learning as is necessary. Of course, a name change alone will not be enough to get us to stop thinking of ourselves as a learned ministry that already has all the answers, and to instead embrace the idea of a learning ministry that is growing and developing along the way. And to really make this shift, we need something that everyone needs, and not just our ministers, and that is sacred curiosity. Sacred curiosity is not just an inquisitive nature, which is something that many of us have, and a thirst for knowledge. That is curiosity, but it is sacred curiosity that we need, and sacred curiosity goes beyond that. Sacred curiosity requires at its foundation humility. It requires openness. It requires a willingness to take risks and make mistakes, and it requires a willingness to change. All of these things which are very hard for us, and especially hard for those of us in leadership positions. Sacred curiosity is a bit like something I just saw a few days ago. As I'm sure most of you know at this point, when I'm not here at church, I spend most of my time at the ice rink skating. And one of my favorite things about figure skating is the kids. I love seeing the wonder on those little faces as they learn to glide along for the very first time, or to go really fast. And I love when they come over to show me new tricks that they've picked up. Sometimes a little kid will come over and go, "Look what I can do now," and they'll kind of glide along on one leg and they'll wobble, but they're pulling it off, and they're really proud of themselves. And I love seeing their reactions, the wonder on their faces as they watch figure skaters or hockey players doing some more complex things out on the ice. And let me tell you, some of those kids are really curious to know just exactly how this skating thing works. They want to know everything, and they are not afraid to take risks. A few days ago when I was practicing a technique, a little boy came up to me and his eyes were so wide, and he gushed at me, "I saw that on Disney on Ice. What was it? Will you do it again? Will you teach me?" I thought he was referring to the Salchow that I had just done, and I was trying to explain that it was a badly performed jump and that I probably couldn't really teach it to him because I was new and he was not ready yet to be learning jumps, but it soon became abundantly clear to me that he wasn't talking about the jump at all. He didn't care about that crappy little cell. He was interested in the landing position, which is the backward 1-foot glide that skaters come out of in our jumps. He thought it was just the coolest thing in the world, and he wanted to know all about it. How did I do it? Could he do it? Could I show him how to do it? How about now? Many an impromptu mini coaching session begins this way. Now, I suggested that he go over to the wall and try the position from a standstill position while holding onto the boards, and then I went back to my own practice, and I figured that that would be the end of it, that would be as far as his curiosity would stretch, or at least his attention span. But man, was I wrong. These public skate sessions go for about 2 hours, and this little guy, who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old and who'd probably never been on skates before in his life, spent the entire time, this whole 2 hours out in the middle of ice, attempting his own landing position over and over again. I've also seen like 5-year-olds out there trying to learn how to master jump their first time on the ice, and they will go 2 hours doing this. This little guy had to know if he could do it. He had to experiment, he had to find out right now. He couldn't glide backward at all yet, and let alone backward on 1 foot, so he was going to try to do it forwards. And so he was falling a lot. But he was not about to give up. He'd just try something, and if it didn't quite work, then he'd just try something a little bit different. As Randy Lewis said last week, if it wasn't working, then he would work it. He was determined and completely enthralled with the learning and the experimenting, with trying to answer his questions. Will this work? No. How about this? Will this work? And now and then, he did manage to get up on one foot in sort of an approximation of the position for several seconds before belly flopping or crashing down on his knees. And he was delighted with himself and with the whole thing. Landing position, just like Disney on ice. Have you ever felt curiosity like that? That kind of curiosity that just drives you to try new things, to really throw yourself fully into a question? That little boy had so many questions for me and needed answers to them then and there. And his pursuit of the answers may not have been the wisest thing in the world. I'm sure he still has some pretty painful bruises from those falls on his little knees, but there was a kind of power to his curiosity. He seemed to learn more about skating in a single hour or so than many kids do in weeks. And along the way, he probably learned courage, determination, and that important life lesson that we all need to learn, which is how to accept failure with grace and move beyond it. His humble acknowledgement that he didn't know everything already that there was to know about skating and had something really cool to learn, his openness to exploring and trying different things, his willingness to take risks and make mistakes along the way, even if it might hurt or make him look like a fool. All of these things helped him to change as a young skater, to grow. Whether we are skaters or ministers or anyone else, we need that kind of childlike wonder, that sacred curiosity that moves us into risk and messiness, if we are going to truly learn to develop as a people, as individuals, as well as a faith. That kind of curiosity is incredibly powerful. It can inspire us, it can drive us and help us to grow. But it requires that we be humble and acknowledge the gaps in our knowledge and wisdom. It requires us to be honest with ourselves in assessing our own weaknesses and growing edges, and especially to be willing to listen when others point them out to us, when others tell us, there's some stuff you got to know, some things that you need to learn. It requires us to regard those growing edges within ourselves, not with fear or guilt or shame or frustration, but with interest and wonder, because we're encountering a sacred mystery within ourselves. And it requires us to be willing to ask for help, to make mistakes even when they're messy, and to risk looking like a fool in the process of learning, because that is how we grow. A few years ago, as I was preparing to finish seminary and beginning to get anxious at the idea of leaving the academic world, a professor remarked that students are not leaving academia and ending our time of learning when we graduate and become ministers. Instead, we are leaving academia and the theoretical world of learning and beginning our time of real learning in context with our congregations, not alone off in school. I am eager to embrace this idea of a learning ministry with you. Ministry is, after all, not just the work that I do, but the work that all of us in this congregation do together to be of service to our community here in this building, as well as the broader community outside of our walls. In just a couple of weeks, our new developmental minister, the Reverend James Kowal-Komodo, will be joining us here to help this congregation continue our own journey of learning and growing together. Let us approach this time with a sense of childlike wonder, that excitement to learn, that humble openness to new things, and that sacred curiosity that helps us to grow. May it be so. And now please rise in body or spirit one more time. We're going to sing number 211, We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder.